All right, welcome to this first Onshape lesson. Onshape is the software that we use to design our robots for each season. We use this for two reasons. The first reason is because FRC robots are big and complicated. And if we just decided to start building and not really plan things out, we would we would just end up with a robot that we're not really able to build. So using Onshape, we're able to see how all of our parts fit together, what size we need to make everything. And then we get some nice capabilities, like we can make parts in Onshape and then make them on our CNC machines or our 3D printers, and we know that our parts have the exact right dimensions. So what we're going to be doing in this first lesson is we are going to learn how to make an assembly, and we're going to use as an example the Catapult kit that we're going to be building this weekend. So anyways, to get started, the first thing you're going to do is click on this Onshape link inside of the lesson 1 page. With that, that'll open up my Onshape document. You'll see that this document is view only. So what you're going to need to do is click on make a copy to edit. You can just leave this Catapult tutorial copy name as default and click create public document. And once you do that, you're going to have your own copy of this document to view and edit. So the first page that you see here is called the assembly page. And you'll notice that that assembly page is blank right now. This is where we're going to put together our catapult. You're also going to see a folder here called parts. And in that folder, you're going to see a bunch of part studios. Part Studio is where you create the parts that you use in your assembly. We have some part studios that only have one part, and we have other part studios that actually have multiple parts when they have very closely related geometry. So in this case, we have one part for a cup mount, and we have one part for the cup itself that's used in the catapult. Another thing to note here is the way that selecting things works in Onshape. So unlike what you might be used to in some other computer programs, in Onshape, when you click on one thing and then click on another thing, you'll see that both things actually stay selected. And then if I want to deselect them, I just click anywhere else. So the work that we're going to be doing today is going to be in our assembly. The first thing you need to do in any assembly is you need to put some parts into it. And to start, what we're going to do is we're going to use the insert button here. Insert's what you're going to use whenever you want to insert parts into your assembly. So we're going to choose insert, and we're going to choose this base plate here. So we'll choose the base plate. We can just leave it in this default position, and we'll click the green check mark. So with that, we have our first part inserted into our assembly. So the first thing that you'll notice is if I click and drag this part, you'll see that I can actually move it around in my assembly. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to press undo to bring it back to its default position. And I'm going to right click on it and fix it in place. And what that does is it just makes it so I'm not able to click on this part and drag it around. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to zoom out so we can add some stuff onto our assembly. And the way you zoom out in Onshape is just by scrolling up. And if you want to zoom in, then you scroll down. Something to note is that you scroll in and out from wherever your mouse is. So if I bring my mouse here, I'm going to zoom in on this point. If I bring my mouse here, I'm going to zoom in and out on this point. And that's something that you'll get used to as you learn this software. So next we're going to insert these 90 brackets. We're going to insert 2 of them into our assembly. So click 1 and then click anywhere in the assembly to insert that. Click again and click another place in the assembly. And we'll go ahead and press the green check mark to insert them into my assembly. So when we insert these parts into the assembly, these aren't constrained to anything. They can move around freely. So I don't want to just fix them in place because they're not actually where I want them. So in order to make them stay where I want to, you use these things called mates. And all a mate does is it describes how one part can move in relation to another part. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use the fasten mate. So you can find the fasten mate up in the top left. And the fasten mate makes it so that 2 parts stay in the exact same position relative to one another. So they're not able to move at all relative to one another. So now we're going to talk about how to mate 2 parts together. So essentially to mate 2 parts together, you need to say what point on each of those parts you want to mate together. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose this center hole on one of the sides of the base plate, right? So you can count there should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from one of the sides all the way at the edge. When I do that, you're going to notice that this weird shape comes up. And this weird shape is called a mate connector. And a mate connector is what actually is used to describe the way the 2 parts relate to each other when you use a mate. The important thing to remember is you're going to select a mate connector on one part, and you're going to select a mate connector on another part. And once you do that, what Onshape is going to do is it's going to make the blue lines of those 2 mate connectors line up. And if you didn't understand exactly what that meant, you'll get the hang of it once you start using mate connectors more often. But to start, I'm going to select this center hole on one of the sides of my base plate. So I'll click here, and then I need to select a hole on one of these 90 brackets. So I want to select a hole at the bottom of my part because I want the bottom of this hole to line up with this hole on the base plate here. The problem is right now I'm not able to see the bottom of this part. So now we're going to learn how to rotate an Onshape. And all you do is you mouse over wherever you want to rotate around. You hold down the right click button on your mouse, and then you're able to just drag your mouse around and rotate the assembly, right? So once I do that, now I'm able to see the bottom of these parts. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and then there are 2 holes here, and I'm going to click the hole towards the outside of the part. It's important also that you're choosing this circle here. If you choose anywhere else, then it could choose a mate connector that's further up the part, and it's not going to mate the part the way I want to. So I need to choose this circle on the bottom of the part here. So I'll do that, and then you'll notice that it moved the part. So if I rotate back, you'll see that I moved it. You'll see that it moved it into the position that I want. Okay. So now I can click the green check mark to accept that fasten mate, and you'll notice I'm not able to drag this part around. Right? So that type of fasten mate is probably the most important piece of CAD that you can learn, because that's the biggest thing that we use to assemble our robots in CAD. If you can figure that out, you're 90% of the way on your way to assembling one of our robots. So we're going to do the same thing now with this second 90-degree bracket. So I'm going to click the hole on the opposite side, again, in the center of my base plate. So I'll click here, and then I need to rotate to be able to see the bottom of this part. And again, I'm going to click this outside hole here. And you'll notice that it does close to what I want it to do, but it's rotated differently than what I would expect. So what I need to do is what's called reorient the secondary axis. So you'll find that button here. And when I click that, it rotates the part by 90 degrees. And I'll just do that until the part is in the orientation that I want, like you can see here. Once I've accomplished that, I can click this green check mark. And now this second part is constrained where I want it. All right, so those are two of our first parts. So now we're going to insert a few more parts. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to insert these uprights here. We're going to have two of them. Click the green check mark. And these are going to be the uprights that we use on our catapult. So again, we're going to use the fasten mate. And now I'm going to click the bottom hole here on these uprights. Again, it's important to click the circle and not click anywhere else on the circle, because that could put the mate connector somewhere we're not expecting. So I'll click there. I'll click one of the holes on my 90 bracket, and you'll see that this upright bar now is actually going into the part, and that's not what I want. So what I need to do when I see something like this is click flip primary axis here, and that'll flip the part 180 degrees. And then once I do that and I see that my part isn't going into my 90 bracket anymore, I can click reorient secondary axis until it's pointed in the correct direction. So what we were doing before is we were clicking this green check mark up here. And when we clicked this green check mark, you saw that we closed out of this fasten mate dialog and we had to click fasten mate again. Something that can save you a little bit of time is if you know that you're going to use fasten mate in just a second, if you click this green check mark down here, the fasten mate stays open, and then I can go find my other part, click on that, and do the same type of fasten mate. So again, I'll click flip primary axis, reorient secondary axis. And now, because the next thing I'm going to do is insert some parts, I can click the green check mark up here, and you'll see the progress that we've made. Now we have our two uprights out here. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to get the arm in place. So to do that, we'll click Insert. We're going to insert this catapult arm, and we'll click the green check mark. Before we actually fasten this arm in place, we want to check to see if the distance between these two uprights matches the thickness of this arm. Because if it doesn't, then we might need to add some spacers to make sure that we actually have space for this. So if I want to measure the thickness of this arm, all I need to do is click on this line here on the corner of this part, and it'll actually tell me the length here. In this case, the length is 0.25 inches, which means that it's 1/4 of an inch. So let's remember that this part is 1/4 of an inch thick, and then let's figure out the distance between these two bars here. And the way that I can do that is I can click on this face, rotate, and click on the face opposite to it. And it'll tell me the distance between those two faces is 1/2 inch. So now we have a bit of a problem. If we've got a 1/2 inch spacing between these two bars, but this bar is only a 1/4 inch thick, then that leaves us with a 1/4 inch of space that there's nothing inside of. And that's just going to allow things to shake around, and that's no good. So what we can do to solve that is we can insert some spacers. So again, you'll go to Insert. You're going to see this spacer here. So I'll click here. This is an 1/8 inch spacer, so we need 2 of them. And we'll click the green check mark. You'll notice with these spacers, we have mate connectors that already exist. That's just a useful thing that some people can do for you in Onshape, so that way when you click on Fasten Mate, you don't have to find parts of the geometry to select. You can just click on this mate connector. Right. So we'll click on the mate connector for the spacer, and then we're going to go up, zoom in here, and click on this top hole on this bar. So that's correct. And the next thing I'm going to do is fasten my other spacer, so I can click this green check mark here. So I've got that. Now I can zoom into my second spacer, click the mate connector, and I'll rotate it so I'm able to see the inside of this other upright. I'll zoom into this circle, click on the circle, and now we have both of our spacers in place. And if I want to hide these two mate connectors here because I'm done using them, I can click the K button on my keyboard, and now those will go away. All right. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to insert this arm, and I want to put it into the assembly. But what I need to do with this is a little bit different. So with everything we had before, we want it to stay fixed in place. We don't want it to move at all. But for a catapult, this catapult arm is actually going to move, and it's going to move in a specific way. It's going to swing up and down around the axle that we put in here. So to do that, there's a special type of mate that's called a revolute mate. And you'll find that right next to the fasten mate. So I'll click on that, and it works in the exact same way that the fasten mate works. So I'm going to click on the third hole on this catapult arm. Click here. And then I'm going to click on one of the inside circles of this spacer. I'll have to flip the primary axis and I'll reorient the secondary axis. And then I'll press the green check mark to accept it. Now I'll show you how this works differently. So if I scroll out and rotate my part by a little bit, what I can actually do is click and drag on this part, and I'm able to move it, but you'll notice I'm not just able to drag it anywhere I want in the assembly. It only moves in this very defined way by rotating about this mate we made. That's really helpful when we have any sort of moving parts on the robot, that we can actually see the way that they move around in Onshape as we're assembling it. And that helps us solve all sorts of different issues. All right. So our next step now is we are going to work on the cup that we put the ball into, that we launch with this mechanism. So to do that, first we're going to insert some spacers. So we're going to insert 4 spacers. Press the green check mark. And we are going to insert these 4 spacers on the 2 top holes of this catapult arm. So again, we can just click on these pre-made mate connectors. We'll click on the circle here. I'll click on this check mark because I'm going to be using this mate connector right away. We'll click here. We'll do that again on this side. Again, and then I need to rotate my view around, so I'm looking at the other side of this arm. Put in here. And finally, put one in here, and that's my last part. So I will click this green check mark and close the Fasten Mate dialog. And then I can click the K button to hide these pre-made mate connectors. All right, so now that I've got these mate connectors in place, I'm going to go ahead and insert. I'm going to insert this Cup Studio. And when I do that, if you remember, when I showed the part studios, I actually made 2 parts together. I made this cup and I made the thing to mount the cup. So I can bring them in together, but when I move them around, you'll see that they're not actually constrained together. So that's the first thing I need to do. I need to constrain these 2 parts together. So as you probably guessed by now, we're going to use the Fasten Mate to do that. Click Fasten Mate, click one of the top holes on this cup mount. We'll zoom out, rotate around, and I'm going to click one of these bottom holes on the cup itself. You'll notice that this isn't rotated the way I want, so I can just use reorient secondary axis. And then I will click the green check mark here. So now I've got these 2 guys constrained together. And now I just need to attach it to my catapult arm. So to do that, I'm going to select one of the inner holes of this cup mount. Select that guy. Zoom out. And then I'm going to select this bottom spacer. I need to select the inside hole on here. And I need to select it on the outside face. So I'll click here. And then you'll notice that it only brought this cup mount along. But if I press the solve button, then it'll solve all of the mates in the assembly and it'll bring the whole thing along. So I can click the green check mark, zoom out, and now you'll see that this cup mount and the cup all move along with the catapult arm. And with that, we will have a finalized catapult. So this might not seem exactly like the way that we put robots together, but the reality is the skills that you learned in this exercise are about 90–95% of what you need to put together a robot. So a robot is just more parts, a lot of times a little bit trickier geometry, but with the skills that you learned here, you can get most of the way to finalizing an FRC robot.